Hi everyone, thanks for coming this afternoon. I'm Rachel Whetstone. I'm responsible for our communications, and I find myself in the strange position of being a British person interviewing an American about politics in America, and I feel rather ill-equipped to do that. So if I make some elementary mistakes, please forgive me. It's wonderful to have John Podesta here. Come to Google. For those of you that haven't seen his book, it's called The Power of Progress. I've been very interested for a long time about how people on the right and left of politics try and acquire particular words. And certainly in the United Kingdom, there's been a long drawn-out battle over the word progressive and who owns it. And it seems to be that the people who can convince the voters in the UK that they are the progressives tend to win. So I think Tony Blair did that very successfully in 1997, which is why his change message worked, and Mrs. Thatcher did it very successfully in 1979. And I suspect the same has been true in American politics, is that people feel like they want to be voting for something new and fresh, which is going to be better than what went before. So I wanted to sort of start really by asking you about why you wrote the book, and about what the sort of key messages in it, and your key perspective on being progressive and what progress means.
Well, the reason I wrote the book was I thought the country was in terrible trouble. I run a think tank now called the Center for American Progress. And I originally set off to write a policy book. And I thought that was inadequate for the moment. I've been a fierce critic of President Bush and the way he steered the country on both economic and security affairs. But I thought it was important to go back and take a look at the history of progressive politics in this country, and perhaps relevant to your point. I mean, obviously, progressive politics in this country really dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. And it was evident in both parties. It was really the movement for social reform, for economic reform, to the capacity to break up concentrations of power and deliver for working people at a time when there was great inequality, the first Gilded Age. So I wanted to tell that historical story and make it relevant to the fact of the challenges that are global now in nature, and what the lessons from that 20th century experience could be brought to bear on the 21st century. And then I threw a little of my personal history in, because I thought it was, again, I'm kind of the story of the American dream. My grandparents came to this country at the turn of the last century, when progressive politics was taking root. They came with literally the clothes on their back. My father had to leave high school after a year and worked in factory all his life, and I was the chief of staff to the President of the United States. So it's kind of a remarkable story, but it's also in some ways a very ordinary story in America, of that people who concentrated on providing opportunity for everyone in the society had an enormous chance for success for the poorest people in this country. I wanted to tell that story. So those three stories are interwoven. I tell a little bit about my experience in the Clinton White House, and you know, how we can meet the big challenges today on global security, on global warming, and the energy challenge, and certainly on the global economy.
Okay, and one thing that I'm interested in is the sort of attitudes to immigration, because it's always seemed to me as an outsider that America has been very pro-immigration, and a lot of its success has been founded on immigration. But it seems that some of those attitudes are changing, and that some people are becoming much more anti-immigration, and this idea that you have enough homegrown talent here, and that you shouldn't have people coming in from outside and effectively what people would perceive as stealing American jobs. Certainly something that a company like Google sees. And I'm sort of interested with your roots on how you see that.
Well, again, I think there's always been a nativist strain in the United States and in the politics of the United States, and people and the questions of immigration, the reaction against new waves of immigrants have always been fierce and negative. But I think the country's always grown by welcoming waves of immigrants, and we've brought tremendous talent into this country. And I think one of the things that's really probably unique about American society today, and one of its tremendous strengths, is the ability and capacity to bring talent, to blend it in, to draw the threads from different cultures together, and strengthen the overall fabric of America. So I think it's very important that we get on with the process of immigration reform. I think it's somewhat surprising to me. I think it was bold for the president to lean out so early in his presidency and say, yes, I meant what I was saying about immigration reform, and we're going to get to it, and we're going to try to do it this year.
Yeah. So you headed up the transition team. And I guess one of the questions you get asked a lot is, you worked for Clinton, you headed up the transition team. Why did you decide not to stay and work for the current president? What sort of made you not want to go back into government?
Other than doing my taxes on TurboTax.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to go back into the government. I think it was really
It's a great opportunity. You got to help fix some wars, fix climate change, help fix the worst economic crisis anyone's seen for 60 years.
As bad as things are, those are the tremendous challenges, I think, for people who are interested in policy and interested in government. That's kind of what floats our boat, I think, on both sides of the political spectrum, to try to take on these big challenges. So it was obviously tempting to try to go back, but I didn't go back for two reasons. One, I told then Senator Obama when he first called me in the summer and asked me whether I would take on the role of trying to manage the transition, that I thought, having looked and studied past transitions, particularly Clinton's transition in '92, that it was better that I not go into government, that he needed someone who could essentially be the CEO of the transition and not looking past that towards a role in government, because I think that it was helpful, I think, to build trust amongst the people who were working in the transition, including a lot of Googlers, and to build trust with the president-elect himself, who I knew but I wasn't confident of, to know that I didn't have any other agenda than to manage it. And I've also built an important, at least I think it's important, think tank in Washington over the last 5 years, and I wanted to make sure that remained relevant in the Obama era, and so I wanted to go back and make sure that the Center for American Progress was strong as well.
Presumably working for a president's fairly exhausting as well, so in some ways it's nice that's a huge thing. It takes over your whole life.
It's a tremendous honor, too.
Yes.
And it's just, I think that we had some rough days in the Clinton White House, but I don't think there was a day I ever regretted going to work there. It was really, it's a tremendous honor. It was it was a privilege, and I thank President Clinton for giving me the opportunity to do that. I think I made a difference, and the White House is very different. I worked on Capitol Hill as well. White House is very different because you get to work in the morning, you can have an idea, you can execute the idea, you can call somebody who has real power and authority and get something done. Whereas working in the Congress, it's more glacial in its movement, it's harder, there's more compromising to be done, there's more coalitions to be built, and change just takes a lot longer, as we're witnessing, I think, even with the current Congress. So the White House is a special place to work.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the transition and how transitions work. In the UK, someone loses the election in the morning and the new Prime Minister moves into number 10 Downing Street in the afternoon, and you literally see the removal vans changing place in Downing Street. It's incredibly brutal. It's just like instantaneous. In America, you do it in a rather more elegant way, and maybe there's some advantages to the way we do it and disadvantages to the way you do it, but I'd be sort of interested in your thoughts and a little bit about how it works, because many people in this room, I'm sure, won't actually know how it works.
Well, people, in a non-parliamentary system, first of all, the president's kind of out there running. He's putting his ideas in front of the public. There is no shadow cabinet. There are no people ready to sort of come into office immediately. So it takes a bit to assemble a team who can go into the executive branch offices, the cabinet secretaries, and the lower-ranking people. And so there's a period of time that takes place. But I think what we tried to do, in addition to that, really, was to be able, in a very difficult time after the financial meltdown, particularly in September, to be able to put together a strategy for governing that enabled the president to hit the ground running when he took the oath of office on January 20th. It used to be that we installed our president in March, when during the transition in 1932, when President Roosevelt was elected, and again, a time of great economic anxiety in the middle of the Great Depression. He wasn't inaugurated till March of that year. And one of the reasons that date was moved up was because of that long interregnum that was, thought that the Depression just got worse and worse during the period in which people had no real faith in Hoover, and yet Roosevelt wasn't in. Even though we shortened it up, I think the American public kind of wished that Obama had gotten into office a little bit quicker, but I think we used that time effectively to try to put together the stimulus bill that passed 25 days after he came into office, and to assemble a very strong, very highly qualified team.
I mean, the one thing that I think is sort of interesting as an outsider, and the president's talked a lot about transparency and openness in government, but it seems to me that when you're looking for your talent for your transition, you're effectively fishing in a small pond, because it's the people that you know and know you. And there's no sort of process of advertising jobs or trying to get fresh blood in. And I wondered sort of how much of a challenge that is, and whether, you know, you feel with hindsight it would be better, it'd be possible to be more transparent and therefore get more people in who are new and fresh and weren't necessarily some of the same old faces.
Well, I think there is, you got to balance people's experience, skill set, their ability to operate to some extent in a political environment, with being able to have a team that has a diverse perspective. So, you know, a lot of people thought a guy like Stephen Chu, who was the Secretary of Energy, who was out here running Lawrence Livermore, and Nobel Prize-winning scientist, was an unusual pick. It may not seem, in retrospect, like an unusual pick to pick somebody who actually knew something about energy to run the energy department, but it was viewed as an unusual pick at the time. And I think we tried to reach beyond the comfort zone, the people who had either served previously in government or who had who were well known in Washington. We used headhunters. We had a very open process for people to try to essentially send their arguments in for why they should be selected. I think that on the question of openness in the transition, which I think the president has tried to do as he's come into office, we tried to really go well beyond what anybody had done before. We had open meetings that were put up on the web, that were videotaped and put up on the web when interest groups or others would come in to see us. Any documents that we collected arguing for from whatever interest group, public interest groups or nonprofits or business groups, we posted all those documents on the web so people could see what was being recommended to the president. He was more available to the press, and is subsequently, when he's gotten into office, he's done 2 full-blown press conferences. He's done now 3, I guess, because the UK councils, I think, a full-blown press conference. And completely available to the press. I think his people have been more open. He's had a little bit of trouble. Probably you guys in the audience could give a little hand to making the website a little slightly more robust at whitehouse.gov. I think actually we took a couple steps backward. It was hard to get the systems up and running for a while. I think it's gotten better. But we've tried to take input. We held, I think, about 1,000 town meetings on healthcare reform during the transition. That input went into the health reform activity. So I think he's trying to run the most open government that we've ever really seen.
And from the transition perspective, you've got a lot of sort of jobs filled, but there's this, in terms of the economic jobs, the Treasury jobs, there's still quite a number that are unfilled.
Right.
Why do you think that proved to be such a challenge, given that the economy is obviously his #1 priority?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is that as slow as it seems, where the Obama administration is doing it faster than any of the previous modern administrations, going back to Reagan, and certainly more quickly than Clinton or than President Bush. Look, we had the stumbles with I made my joking reference to the tax problems that Secretary Geithner had, and then Tom Daschle had, and I think that kind of slowed down and churned up the process for a while. And Treasury had become a particularly slow pace in terms of people filling in those jobs. But now I think they're back on track, and most of those people have been at least selected. Many of them have been named, and they await confirmation. There was one of the things the 9/11 Commission pointed out was that there was such a slow transition on the national security side that they gave some new authorities to the people in the transition to get security clearances more quickly, and focused on the need to fill these jobs quickly. And we tried to meet those expectations. I think, as I said, it hit a little bit of a rough patch, but I think it's now back on track to try to fill up the government. There, in the non-Senate confirmed jobs, there are probably about 1,000 people now serving at senior levels of the government, and I think that's quite a remarkable record. The Senate has a role to play too, I should say, to criticize my former employers. They can slow things down incredibly, and I think they've gotten a little bit carried away with some of the kinds of questions that they're looking at, and the delays that they're putting into the process. So that's something that again, I think has to be balanced out.
Yeah. No. And just before we go on to some of the ideas in your book, you've worked now for President Clinton and President Obama in very critical points during their life. I mean, what are some character, or one or two character traits that you think which they have which are very similar? Some of the things that you really need to be character traits that are essential for a president.
Well, they're both wicked smart. They both really know a lot. Yeah. Let me say what they're like, and I'll say one word about how I think they're slightly different. And they know a lot about policy, and they care, I think, in a similar way about what the mission of the presidency is, which ultimately it's to, I think they have a pretty good focus when the door closes who they're working for, who they're fighting for, and what it means to use the government to improve the opportunity for people in this country, and what it means to make America once again a force of cohesion and good around the globe. So I think in that way they're quite similar. Clinton was a more I've described as to some extent a more horizontal thinker. He just knew a lot about everything, and applied that vast array of knowledge against any particular problem, and sometimes in amazing ways. I mean, in a sort of Renaissance way, really. Obama's a more disciplined guy in the sense of he takes a problem, he churns through it, comes up with an outcome. He likes to draw people in. Secretary Gates, the defense secretary, got in trouble the other day when he was asked what was the difference between Bush, who he served, and Obama, and he said that Obama liked to really get into the details of the problem, and then he thought, well, maybe that wasn't such a good answer, and he said that in any meeting, which I actually noticed during the transition, he'll draw everybody in the room out. I think his expectation is that if you were important enough to get into the room with them, then you're important enough to have a point of view, and he'll draw everybody out, but he'll usually close a meeting with giving his perspective and giving a kind of a clean decision. And so maybe a little more lawyer-like in his orientation, I don't know. But Obama has just an amazing ability to live in a place that is my friend and former colleague David Gergen described as aloha Zen, which I wish I had thought up. But it just in a sort of a calm place that no matter how tough the problem is, he is able to be unflappable in that circumstance. And I think that's very important, I think, to a staff, because people do take on, I suppose, the characteristics of their boss to some extent.
Yeah. I think it really came through in the campaign as well. Given how difficult the campaign was and the situations that were going on externally with the economy and everything, I just think the amazing sort of calmness and sort of seriousness with which he dealt with, and also consistency. He seems to be amazingly consistent about what he thinks. So he can be asked the same question over again, and he doesn't appear to be frightened of giving the same answer. One thing that I'm interested in is you say that both of them have a very clear view about why they're in the White House. They're there to better the lives of Americans, and particularly Americans who are less fortunate than others. But when you're in the White House, how easy is it to maintain, how easy is it to keep focused on something like that? You live in such a bubble. You live in such a rarefied world. I think this happened with Mrs. Thatcher. I think she had a very clear view when she first came in about what her job was. And then you live in this bubble and you meet all these different people, and it's easy to get distracted. How do you think Clinton managed to keep focused, and how do you think Obama will?
Well, look, it's a tremendous problem. I mean, I used to think that the bars were put up there to keep people out, people on the outside from coming in, I'm sorry. And it's a tremendous problem that you can get isolated only talk to people who, you can develop a groupthink there. And that's why I think it's so important for whoever's in the White House to be able to both have a diverse group of advisors who can give different perspectives. But I think it's equally important to be able to get out of there, to be able to kind of touch and feel real people, to be able to, I fought hard for him to keep his BlackBerry with only minimal success, because he has his BlackBerry, but I'm not sure he uses it at least the same way he did during the context of the campaign. To have diverse sources of information, it's really critical, and to get out and really touch and feel people. Again, I know President Clinton better than President Obama, although I got to know him pretty well, people would make fun of the fact that there was no rope line that he would ever pass, that he wouldn't get out and touch and feel and shake hands with people, and that he lived off that energy. But he also would come back to the White House with stories of people that would literally that people would tell him in those settings where he'd pull the limo to a stop, jump out with people just to shake hands with people, but they'd impress upon him some fact of their life that needed attention. And he'd come back and say, well, we got to work on this. Yeah. I think President Obama's like that in a very real sense. I mean, I don't think he's isolated. I think he has an incredible ability to listen to people and absorb their stories and be able to really, I think, incorporate those into what he's trying to get done, so that it all isn't just numbers and abstraction, which I would accuse some of his economic team of being susceptible to. But I think, in the end of the day, it's about real people's lives.
So your book is The Power of Progress, for all of you who haven't seen it. How would you define progressive, and why do you think sort of being progressive is so important in politics today? Well,
as I was saying earlier, I think that progressive politics has distinct roots in American politics. Not in a partisan sense, but distinct roots that was about a crusade really for economic justice and social justice. And I think that the core roots of it's less theoretical than classic liberalism, which was about protecting human autonomy, I think, and from the imposition by either the state or large concentrations of corporate power. And it's more about reform, and I think the practitioners of progressive politics over the course of time, including Clinton and Obama, but Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, the great Republican reformers like Bob La Follette and Albert Cummins in Iowa, they were fighting concentrations of power, because I think that they fundamentally believed that providing opportunity for everyone, working for the common good and against special interests, experimenting with what works, and being open and effective, and making your argument directly to the people, and engaging the American people in that cause of renewal and reform was going to deliver results. And I think, indeed, if you look at moments in our history where opportunity spread, whether that was in the New Deal, the Civil Rights Movement, the tremendous economic success, I think, and social success that Clinton had, it was focusing on that set of core ideas and embracing that spirit of reform that's moved our country forward. And I think it is in contrast to a kind of a theory of the case in which government's the problem. That was, people, Ronald Reagan used to love to say that, and I think George Bush proved it, that government was the problem. But, I believe that if you have someone who really is invested in those core elements and believes that the government has a role to play in shaping and democratizing capitalism, that you produce better results.
And how much sort of special interest pleading do you thought you saw going into the stimulus? I mean, it's such large sums of money that it motivates so many people. And I think what's interesting now is 20 years ago it was just like big business, but now it's not-for-profits as well. And there's a huge amount of sort of lobbying must go into spending that amount of money.
Well, you know, I think during the course of, I just to tell a brief story about the transition. In September, when we first sat down to, this is right as Lehman Brothers is going bankrupt, the financial crisis is deepening. The House had just passed a $150 billion stimulus bill. And the president said we didn't need a second, President Bush said we didn't need a second stimulus bill, said he would veto it. When we sat down, we thought that number needed to be $300 billion. By election day, it was 600. By the time he presented it to Congress, it was 775 billion. But the theory of the case, I think, changed from just providing some demand into the economy to try to build, and that's what he talked about yesterday at Georgetown University, to try to build the building blocks for sustainable long-term economic growth that was going to be both sustainable on a growth pattern and more broadly shared from the perspective of social equity in the country. And that needed to be focused on three big projects: reforming public education, transforming the way we use and produce energy, and reforming our healthcare system. That you couldn't have strong, sustained growth, the economy couldn't recover, it couldn't deliver for the American people, and the business environment couldn't improve unless you took on those three big challenges. And so I think those elements remained intact. Did people fight about around the edges about how each one of those would be implemented? Of course they did, and they're still fighting about them in Congress. There's a big fight going on about how student loans ought to be distributed, whether they should be through a direct government loan program, which I believe they should be, and Obama's proposed, or through a private sector system. Big fight about energy, obviously, that's going on now, and then probably the mother of all political fights: how are we going to reform our healthcare system so everyone has affordable, quality health coverage, and we bend the cost curve so businesses can survive in the economy and environment.
Coming back to your point about government, and I'm on a different, more on the Reagan side of the argument, which is that
I got that.
There are definitely times when governments
you got the libertarian side of that liberalism.
Yeah, I've got the. We're in a very unfortunate. My husband actually works for the Conservative Party, and we're in an unfortunate situation. His address is steve.hilton@conservatives.com, and every time you go into anywhere in Palo Alto, and they try and join up to a health club, and the people when they discover your email address sort of don't want your business anymore. It's very interesting. And trying to explain that the British Conservatives are different from the Republicans has proved a challenge. But anyway, I suppose there are circumstances. And a lot of your book is about more government being the solution to the problem. And one of the concerns I always have with politicians, particularly as politicians become less and less trusted, is when there's a problem, politicians always give the impression that they can solve that problem. And then quite often they can't solve it because it's not within one person's grasp or one organization's grasp to solve it, and then public trust goes down in them again. And at what point do we see politicians saying, actually, no, these are not problems that politicians can solve, these are problems that families have to solve, or schools, or the headmaster or the head teacher has to solve? No,
I strongly believe that first of all, that the president has an important role to play in providing a voice on those sorts of questions, and being a cultural leader in the country, as well as dealing with government. I'm not sure I'd accept the charge of more government, more government, more government. It depends on what you mean by that. I think that government has a very important role to play in shaping markets. Take energy. I think that we have a system that's grown up. It's been incentivized because of certain government policies. It needs to be re-incentivized to move us towards clean, renewable energy and to solve the problem of climate change. I think that there would be agreement of that by conservatives in the UK, by progressives in the United States, and by the Labour Party in the UK. Not so much with the most conservative elements of the Republican Party in the US. But I think that government can't replace the instruments of innovation that exist in the private sector, and I don't And I don't think my book suggests that it can. It can set the right incentives, the right platform, give the right policies. You can do that both through, to some extent, setting the right tax policy. But I think, most importantly, I think, for example, putting a price on global warming pollution, creating drivers that will produce more renewable energy in the system, then letting the private sector and the marketplace respond to those challenges with, to some extent, with neutral principles, but guiding the course of change is, I think, an appropriate role for government. And I don't think that that doesn't bring about some kind of Soviet-style economic structure. What it really does is enables the private sector to do what it does best. And I think the contrary example is what happens when government leaves the field. And I think we've just witnessed that with the lack of regulation, the lack of ability to have transparency in the financial system, the inability to take a look at what was happening in the housing market, certainly the inability to see what was going on in the financial system more broadly in terms of the risk that was building up in the system. So that's not if you go too far in the direction of Thatcherism, you end up with that too.
Okay. Yes. I think one of the interesting things about Thatcher actually is a lot of what she did was more government and was more centralisation, and that had some fairly profound social consequences in the United Kingdom. I'm interested in talking about the environment and tax. A lot of economists support basically a carbon tax because they think it's the simplest way to do it. Most politicians support cap and trade system. It's true in the UK as well. And do you think that's just purely for political reasons? That basically taxes are just very unacceptable. No one wants their taxes put up, even if it's for a good reason. Do you think if you were starting from a kind of blank sheet of paper that you would come up with a cap and trade system?
Well, I think that we've had success with a cap and trade system in this country under the Clean Air Act in dealing with acid rain. So I think there's a predicate for it. I think that's how it got started. And of course, the United States pushed that in the international negotiations during Clinton's era. And the EU adopted it, not necessarily with a great deal of
intelligence.
And it's a work in progress. I would freely admit that. I think you can make a cap and trade system work as economically efficiently and as transparently as a tax. You have to work at that to some extent. Some economists argue that a tax is clearer because it's less susceptible to political change. My view is it's probably more susceptible to political change. But I think the most fundamental argument for favoring cap and trade versus a tax is that in its most fundamental way, it is transparent. It says this is how much pollution we're going to permit, and we're going to ratchet that number down, and we're going to do it over a period of time that the economy can absorb and in fact innovate around. And that will actually be, rather than costing the economy more money, it'll both save money in the short term, create jobs, create growth, create new industries. But you're marking to what you really want to get after, which is a very clear sense of how much pollution you're going to permit in the atmosphere. And so I think a tax at some level is just an estimate of that. And I think a cap and trade has the advantage of saying we're going to allow this much today and this much in 2020 and this much in 2025 and so forth and so on until we get down to acceptable levels to stabilize the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide.
Okay, so there's two microphones if anyone wants to ask questions. If you could just go up to the mic. Just while this gentleman's going up to the mic, how optimistic are you about the sort of world's ability to address climate change?
The world's ability.
Well, okay, America's a big cause of the problem. So if America and the European Union could get their stuff sorted, that would be a big step forward.
Right. I'm extremely optimistic that the new administration has put us on the right path. We've made these massive investments in clean energy in the recovery bill. I think we have a very good chance of getting more of these so-called complementary policies like the renewable electricity standard and efficiency standard. Obama's already put in place the ability to raise fuel standards, let California regulate CO2 emissions from automobile tailpipes. So lots already happened and is going to happen. And I think we can get in place this year. I'm optimistic that we can get in place a cap and trade system, put a price on carbon. The real question is the global economy outpacing the ability to stabilize concentration levels and therefore the rise in global warming at levels that won't cause really massive and to some extent catastrophic change, particularly for the poorest people who contribute the least. Mm-hmm. And on that, I'm less optimistic. I think that, you know, even if we get cooperation from the Chinese, which I think is possible, from the Indians, which I think is less likely, at least in the short term, I think that the trajectory is such that we're in for a lot of very drastic and to some extent in weak states, very unmanageable change when you think about the effect on water, on the effect on food production, on the effect of human migration. A lot of this is already built into the system. So the capacity to manage this problem over the next 40 or 50 years, I think, is the generational problem that all political leaders, whether they know it today or not, are going to have to be grappling with through mid-century and beyond, I think.
I wanted to ask you about taking the word progressive in the broader sense, meaning reform-minded and for progress, not trying to destroy government. What would you say or what do you see as the most progressive elements in the Republican Party and on the American political right?
Well, as I said, I think that there were very strong elements in the Republican Party that were progressive, and I think you still see them exist. They just don't tend to reside in the Congress. Political reform really emanated from the causes, and McCain picked that up during his career as a political reformer in the Senate. But that, again, began 100 years ago with dealing with the direct election of senators, women's suffrage, et cetera. Those were reforms that existed on both sides of the political spectrum. You see in the governors the capacity to use these market mechanisms to drive change with respect to energy. Schwarzenegger's a good example. Charlie Crist another good example in Florida. The capacity to embrace change and innovation, I think, had been an element of the Republican Party. But I think that my own view, and I admit to being a partisan, I guess, is that the Congressional Party has locked down way far to the right, and Bush wasn't an aberration. Bush was the completion of a project that Gingrich was arguing for, that the Republican Congress in battling with Clinton was arguing for, and I think it produced disastrous results. And I think that that doesn't mean that the Republican Party can't find a voice of reform again. I suspect they will, because if they don't, they're going to cede the middle, I think, to the Democratic Party. So they're going to have to do what David Cameron's done, which is to kind of modernize, refresh, and argue in favor of reform. And Gordon Brown has had the ill fate of both having presided over the UK government during this period of global downturn, and having inherited, I think, the hangover of the reaction to Blair on Iraq. I think he's in tough straits at this point politically. But I think it's not just what he's done; it's also that the Conservatives in the UK have tried to modernize their worldview and their perspective. I don't really think that's happened if you look at where the congressional leadership is in the Congress.
I think that history has taught us from the UK that it will get worse. They will get more immoderate before they get more moderate. I mean, the British Conservative Party, when Blair came in, got further and further to the right because they thought that was the way to win an election. And it's only recently that they've understood that being reasonable and moderate and progressive is the way to win elections. And it got very bad before it got better.
Hi, thanks for coming. My question is a variation of Rachel's final question about how optimistic you were of or climate change legislation. With regards to healthcare, it seems to me not a question of whether you're optimistic that maybe we have a chance that something will happen, after such a change election in the fall, but whether you actually think this year we'll see healthcare legislation, and if so, what will it look like after getting through the Senate?
Great question. I think that I would rate the chances of healthcare reform happening as higher than actually enacting the cap and trade. Although I think, as I said, I think there's a better than 50-50 chance both will get done. But I think that there's quite a momentum for healthcare reform. I think it is. I believe that, not immodestly, that we've been working at the center, and I've lost half of my staff to the administration to continue to work on it, in the form in which it will take place, which is there's now become a fair amount of agreement about the essential elements that need to be embedded in healthcare reform, and that is that there have to be real affordable choices for health insurance that are available to everyone. There has to be an emphasis placed on providing better information and that in the system. The whole fight around healthcare IT is not so much about billing and et cetera. It's about being able to do comparative effectiveness research so that delivery mechanisms push towards quality as opposed to just more procedures the way they are geared today. The Congressional Budget Office, for example, did a study last fall that found that there were $700 billion worth of procedures done that showed no positive health effect. So you have to have information. You probably, I'm not telling anything people in this room don't know. You have to have information in order to be able to judge quality outcomes, and then you have to gear payments towards that. So I think that's very important. I think there'll be a big emphasis on trying to drive wellness and disease management through the system, through these payment structures. The bottom end needs to be strengthened. The Medicaid program needs to be strengthened, and I think that'll happen. And then there have to be a kind of sliding scale of support for people based on their income to make sure that they have access to quality, affordable health care. There's fairly broad agreement on that. Where there's still a fight, I think, is over some of the details about how quickly, if at all, you get rid of the link between employment-based health care and go to on one end, either a single-payer system or at another end, one in which you're throwing everybody into somewhat of a regulated, individualized market. I think that the likely outcome of this will be someplace in the middle. We'll keep the employment-based system going, but we'll change essentially the incentives that give people who are not getting their insurance through an employment-based system a little bit of a better shot at keeping people in the system. But I think that the core elements are there. There's some agreement in the Senate, even amongst Republicans, about what those are. And I think that there's a head of steam built up in both the House and the Senate to get it done. The first test of that will be whether the Senate Finance Committee can produce a bill that has bipartisan agreement. But I'm extremely optimistic they can do it. I was at the White House summit that the president called, and even the Republicans were sort of playing ball there, which is somewhat unusual in this current period of time.
Hi. So I guess other than healthcare, since obviously the Senator's been a strong proponent of that, is there something that President Obama, an agenda item or policy that President Obama is really pushing for that in the next year or two that you're particularly excited about, or you think is particularly revolutionary compared to what we've seen before? I know a lot of great things have been passed in the past, 70 days, 80 days now, that aren't going to really take effect for a year or so. But is there one thing that President Obama is pushing for that you'd love to see, or is there something that you would really love to see him get behind and put some weight behind over the next 4 years?
Well, obviously, we've been talking about the energy thing, so I'm spending probably more of my time on that than anything, and I think that's a difficult project, and I think it's one that he needs to see through to fruition, and I think that the team he's assembled is really pretty amazing. I mean, it's not, I mentioned Chu, but I mean across the board, world-class scientists, world-class political leadership, people with a real commitment to do it. And I think he can drive massive change on the energy front and on the climate change front through on that. So I'm very excited about that. The thing we haven't talked about that I think that he talked about a lot in the campaign is to provide a fairer tax system. And I think that that's a project that to some extent he put a down payment on through the stimulus bill, because the 2 years of this so-called middle-class tax cut, the make work pay tax cut, were included in that bill. But ultimately, I think that our tax system got out of whack and was at some level a driver of the social inequality and the income inequality in this country. And I think that's a project that needs attention. It's a difficult one. And it's one that Democrats tend to shy away from, but I'd like to see him have a simpler system that's fairer and that will reward both work and innovation as we go forward. He's promised that at the end of the year. He's created this group that's chaired by Paul Volcker, the former chairman of the Fed, looking at both corporate and personal tax reform. But I think that's very fundamental to creating the kinds of opportunity that working people need in this country. So, I look forward to that, and hopefully we won't exhaust the political system through this fight on healthcare and energy and education reform. In the course of this year, we'll have some capacity and still desire to move on that. We haven't really talked about the foreign policy agenda either. So, I mean, that's huge as well. And look, what a sea change I think this trip was, what he's done to project a different image of America around the globe. I think he had a very successful trip to the G20, to NATO, to his trip to Turkey. He's off to some of the Americas, and he definitely likes to travel. Agreed to go to China, agreed to go to Russia, and we'll be off to Mexico in the next few days, as well as some of the Americas in Trinidad. So I think it's really important, because the problems that the United States faces are obviously global in nature. I think he understands that, projects that. I think he's reconnected the United States and what people admire about the United States with the global agenda. And you all probably travel a lot overseas, as I do. And I think the one thing you heard over and over again before the election was, we want to vote, because this is our election too. And I think that his capacity to deliver on that is big, and the problems are big, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and other places. But I think I'm very hopeful that he will be able to kind of reconstruct and rebuild both global structures and a global alliance that can deal with these problems.
First of all, let me say thank you so much for coming, and really appreciate it. I would say in general, in terms of President Obama, I think that what he's done in terms of foreign policy, energy policy, it's been such a welcome respite from the last 8 years. I do know that in terms of the banking crisis, it's something that he's been getting a lot of flack for from people on the left. And I'm curious in terms of, I wonder, there's been great talk about sort of the problem of the echo chamber, in which sometimes people of only a certain type of thinking can get sort of caught in how to interpret the response to a crisis, and I think that maybe some of that might be happening here with the banking crisis, and I'm curious as to what your opinion might be on that in terms of bringing back someone like Robert Rubin as a senior advisor, and obviously Geithner has been very involved in Wall Street, and I know that you know, at the end of the Clinton administration, there was the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, and a lot of that led to the deregulation that has gotten us into this mess so far. And he's gotten some flack in terms of from prominent economists like Paul Krugman, and even people like Stiglitz, and thinking that maybe not necessarily a question that this money needs to be spent, but that it's not necessarily being spent to free up lending and to open up, basically to put the money into the right direction. So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
Well, kind of two questions there. One is what's the substance of the policy, and I think that it's a hard call. And you know, I have a lot of respect for the people who are trying to make these calls, and they're doing. You have to kind of think to yourself, what's the domino effect of the alternative strategy, which is if you begin to nationalize, take the ones that are on the front page, Citibank, Bank of America. What's the domino effect from that strategy? And it's and you know, I think that there is they're definitely building the airplane as they're trying to fly it. I think there's and you know, I suppose time will tell. I think that they've rendered judgments on the housing side that seem to be working. They've tried to get at least they've stabilized the institutions. Whether that's going to pay benefit back to the public in the form of credit going back into the system, I think it's, you know, we're just at the early stages of knowing whether the strategy is going to work. We're still awaiting what they've now, as of today and yesterday, have said they will do, which is to have some public accountability on the so-called stress tests in the banks. So it's a work in progress. They're smart people. I think they're making good judgments. I think it's a little bit easier to be armchair quarterbacking it and arguing for nationalization. But I respect Paul Krugman. So I mean, I don't think it's you know, it's you read both sides and render your own judgment. It's a tough call. The other thing you argued about, the other thing you raised, was the so-called echo chamber. We now have, today's tax day, so we have the Fox-sponsored tea parties around the country on tax day, and we've gotten and we participate in this at the center. We've gotten to the point where I think we've utilized the resources, I think, of both sides to try to provide information to people to use the blogosphere. Our blog, Think Progress, is one of the top political blogs in the country, and to put information out there, to try to be fact-based, to try not to get it wrong, and to compete with what was just a kind of one-way sort of echo chamber on the right. I think at least over the last 4 or 5 years, we've built up at least a debate that's going on in the country today. And I think if we have this debate on the left, that's probably a good thing, actually. You know, I think my experience is that it goes back to your comments about, or the earlier question about the BlackBerry. I think it's fine to have people who are center and left fighting with each other and trying to find through that dialogue and debate the best solutions facing the country. And I'm sure, you know, you never like criticism when you're on the inside, but I think they probably sharpen up the arguments that they have to, and the program that they have to implement by hearing those criticisms from Stiglitz and Krugman and the others.
Daniel, I had just a couple of last questions. First of all, one thing that I was here on election day, and a lot of people at Google were very sad because of what happened with Proposition 8.
Yeah.
When do you think that, myself included, when do you think that, I mean, to me it's quite sort of shocking that same-sex marriage is such a divisive issue in the US. When do you think that those kinds of social issues will be less divisive? I mean, if you're talking about a progressive agenda, that to me is something where, everyone should have the right to marry the person that they love, and so to me as a European it's quite shocking.
Right. Look, I think the country's changed a lot. I think that I grew up in Chicago, went to school in Western Illinois. So who would have thought that Iowa would lead the nation? And that's a good thing, I think, that kind of movement can be seen in the nation's heartland. And if you look at what's happened in the American population in general, attitudes towards tolerance across the board, but particularly towards on the LGBT agenda, have changed enormously in the last decade. And if you look at young people, I don't even think they get what this is about. So I think that I think the country's experience has been always to widen the circle of opportunity and to be, and I think while there'll be setbacks, and Prop 8 was certainly a setback, I think while the directional flow in this country, whether that's the vote in the Vermont legislature, the Supreme Court decision in Iowa, it's going in one direction. And they're going to be holdouts to that for a fairly long time. But I think that there's no question that particularly as younger people move through and this big generation of I guess they're baby boom echoes, the millennium generation moves through, it's going to have a profound effect on politics. And I think we'll look back at this period and it'll seem like the suffrage movement in the early part of the 20th century. You can't imagine that women were denied a right to vote. No.
And then one final question, which is, obviously you live in DC, you spend most of your time with politicians. How do you think politicians view Google? And what would you, if you were sitting in our seat, what would you see was the biggest threat? There's no question that the Congress today is more tech savvy. I think they view Google as it's kind of a hotbed of innovation. I think that there's the competitive forces in the tech part of the economy, I think, are probably less well understood, and they probably are less well-formed attitudes about who's up and who's down in terms of questions of who really has market power now and where does that exist and how can that be extended and what are the right policies with respect to innovation, et cetera. But as a global phenomena, not just as an economic success story of America, but as a global phenomena of providing information to people, being really a tool of empowerment. I think the Congress gets that, and I think that's probably why a lot of people want to come out here and walk around the campus, not just for the free food. Although that's an important.
Although that's an important advantage.
Yeah.
But I think they get it, and I think I think on both sides of the aisle they'll want to see continued success because they know that again it's not just a powerful economic driver and a powerful enabler, but it's a technology of freedom.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for coming. I very much enjoyed your book, and you've been wonderful to listen to, so thank you very much, and have a good trip.
Thanks, Rachel.
Bye-bye.